Recently, this wood duck hatchling was spotted in the same nest as a screech owl. The people observing it called an expert to try and sort out what was going on. They thought that this cute little duck was going to be lunch for a hungry owl. But that wasn't the case. No, the duck was unharmed and eventually hopped out of the nest and into a nearby pond. So, what was this duck doing hanging out with an owl? As it turns out, wood ducks are actually brood parasites. Brood parasites are a type of animal that have another animal raise their young. An adult wood duck had laid its eggs in this owl's nest, and the owl hatched the duck egg, and this isn't even the first time this has been recorded. A clutch of wood duck eggs being hatched by an owl was also documented occurring in 2007. Brood parasitism is particularly prevalent among birds, fish, and insects. Not that mammals don't rear each other's young, but the specifics of brood parasitism is that it's a species-wide behavior. All wood ducks lay eggs in other nests and so on. While brood parasites are most commonly found amongst birds, the nature of egg-laying and nest-making seem to lend well to the development of this behavior from an evolutionary standpoint. There are other examples though, and since birds are actually some of the most famous, my inclination is to start by leaning into the more obscure. For starters, a type of cyprint minnow that lives off the south shores of Japan is considered a brood parasite of the freshwater perch. Perch make a habit of nesting, specifically the males will build a safe bed of aquatic vegetation, female perch will come and lay their eggs, and the male will keep constant vigil over the nest, protecting it from predators. The minnow will then sneak into the nest and lay its eggs, leaving them for the larger fish to care for. There was actually a study where 65% of the nests observed contained eggs of the parasite species. That's not a bad batting average at all. Cyprint minnow, especially when you consider that the minnow has to lay the eggs and escape without drawing the attention of the male perch or possible lurking predators. See, even in the exceptions to the brood parasitism behavior being in birds, there are still some common threads that tie it all together, such as the animal building nests. That's true for the cuckoo bee, an animal named for a more notorious brood parasite that we'll talk about more in a little bit. Cuckoo bees will sneak into other beehives and overpower the queen. She then forces the workers, either through violence or pheromones, to care for her own offspring. Then, when they're old enough, they leave the hijacked hive to go and steal nests of their own. The circle of life is beautiful, isn't it? And speaking of beautiful flying creatures, how about butterflies? I know what you're thinking. Come on, didn't you already just do a huge segment in that other video about carnivorous, rot-eating butterflies? Do you really have to go after butterflies again? And I'm sorry to say, but I do. The mountain Alcon blue butterfly produces young that trick ant colonies into feeding them. They release a pheromone that makes the ants believe that the butterfly larva is one of the young ants in the anthill. They will be fed and cared for by the ants until they are ready to pupate and become beautiful blue butterflies themselves. Wow! Now I know you are all chomping at the bit. This is thrilling. But when are you going to tell us about the champions of trickery, the brood parasite birds? Well, it's soon, I promise. But I wanted to talk about something else first. Stop booing! I promise you'll find it really interesting. See, the whole time you have to be wondering, well, how does the other animal trick the first one for so long? Surely they would notice. And yes, sometimes there is a complicated method of hiding the true identity of the host's egg. Sometimes, though, the animal just doesn't care. And the thing that absolutely baffles scientists is that this will occasionally be true to groups of animals, but not universal across a species. Some animals reject the parasites, some raise them. And the difference between those two groups is incredibly unclear and appears fairly inconsistent based on the observations we're making now. Also, as much as it makes us feel warm and fuzzy to chalk it up to kindness, bear in mind some animals huck the baby bird out of the nest the moment they realize it isn't theirs. Equating these behaviors with human emotions is a comforting projection, but a projection that will make it harder to understand the actual movements of nature. None of these birds are right or wrong, good or evil. They're just trying to survive in the environments they exist in. Morality can't really be applied to them. That all being said, people really love to use the cuckoo as the prime example of brood parasitism villainy. This is the bad boy of birds. No other bird is this evil, this insidious, this clever when it comes to making sure that its young are born and others are not. Not only will certain cuckoos parasite on specific species because they can imitate their eggs so well, but they will also hold the egg within them for a whole day before laying it to ensure that the egg hatches sooner. Why do they want the egg to hatch sooner? So that the cuckoo chick can kill off the other chicks before they hatch and receive all the food, of course. And this behavior happens right after hatching, which means it's ingrained as an instinct since they have no time to learn it or no way to learn it from their absent parents. But yeah, as insidious as that all sounds, it's just a bird doing what birds do. They are no more evil than an eagle that encourages its young to fight to the death until only the strongest chick remains. Okay, bad example, but you get my point. The same goes for the North American cowbird, which exhibits similar parasitic behaviors. Now, interestingly enough, some behaviors have been observed in cowbirds that are believed to be strong indicators as to why their eggs get accepted. If the host birds push the cowbird's eggs out of the nest, the cowbird is known to attack and destroy the remaining host bird's eggs. This is a behavior purely intended to discourage rejecting eggs in the future. And some people will say, well now, bullying the other birds and killing their eggs, then abandoning their own children? That sounds pretty evil to me. And then I have to do the whole speech about human ethics not applying to animals again. It's a mess. If it makes you feel all better, the cowbirds don't abandon their young, they're just present in different ways. While the cowbird's hatchling is being fed and cared for by the host bird, the parent cowbird remains nearby. See, the thing is, if a cowbird is studied in captivity, it will behave as its parents do, believe it is of its host species. But in the wild, they somehow manage to learn to be cowbirds. How do they do it? It turns out the moms and other cowbirds stick around, and the adolescent cowbirds, once old enough, will leave the nest at night to socialize with the other cowbirds and learn how to behave amongst their own species. Additionally, the mother cowbird will use its time studying its brood from afar to learn where is best to lay her next clutch of eggs. I would say something about two birds and one stone, but it seems a bit rude in this particular instance, so I'll move on. Interestingly enough, some species have learned some very interesting ways to defend against this parasitism. The one that struck me as the most interesting was the fairy wren, also known as the splendid fairy wren, because that's just delightful. These wrens will teach their young a call while they are still in the egg. A call that can only be replaced by other fairy wrens. If the newly hatched wren cannot replicate the call, then the fairy wren will reject the child, believing it to be from a parasite brood, and there's a good chance they're right. So, what do you think about this interesting animal behavior? Are there any animals that practice brood parasitism that I didn't mention? Are there odd in-between examples that don't really fit the definition, but you just think are cool anyway? Feel free to leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos where I lecture you for being way too judgmental about animals and their behaviors.